And I'm creating it right now. Creating it right now. All right, everyone, you are now live on YouTube.
Well, I have to do photos.
I've got to help her for a moment this morning.
Just consider yourself lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, he looks happy. He's getting prepared for in about 30 years to take your position there, Logan.
Might give it to him here soon. Is there an age limit?
Director Williams looked like she's surrounded by some avian species.
Good morning.
Oh, I see how nice positioning, Chairman.
You changed.
I'm at the office right now, so I'm not trying to show off my alcohol, although that's a nice secondary benefit, but I'm trying to block that window.
I thought maybe you were at the Elks Club.
That wouldn't be a bad place, although our Elks Club just declared bankruptcy. Okay, it looks like it's 9 o'clock. It looks like we have everybody. I'm just checking. Pat, are you with us?
I am.
Hello, welcome.
You should
Okay,
be up and running.
great. All right, let's go ahead. We'll
You.
start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Can I go ahead and get a motion on expenses?
Chairman Colton, I never received the expenses.
Oh. Well, why don't we go ahead and just kick that to the next meeting? Because I didn't see them either.
There were no, the expenditures would have been the same as last time. There were no other expenditures since our last meeting.
So does that mean we don't have to approve any?
No,
There wasn't any?
we approve it this time.
Okay. All right, let's move on to commission reports. I will start with Commissioner Bauer.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to see your faces. I'm still since the last meeting, I spent most of my time talking with people about the Madison. And since our meeting was canceled, I thought I'd offer up some perspective. I met with, of course, FWP staff has been tremendous through all this. They've really put in the work and developed a good instrument, I thought, in the EA to open the discussion. I spoke with business people, lots of outfitters, lots of guides and their representatives, lots of unaffiliated anglers, and a considerable number of affiliated anglers with different organizations. The general consensus was by probably, a vast majority was we really need to move something forward. And I think the sentiment is grounded in two things. The first being that the resource is showing signs of stress. And that's an important thing that I think has been dodged around in a lot of the discussions, that the population is showing signs of stress. The data it's not conclusive, but it is fairly compelling. And the second thing is during the COVID crisis, the amount of crowding on the Madison River has been significant. And, a lot of people retreating to the river. Thank goodness we all have that opportunity, but that's in the absence of commercial outfitting. So we really need to move forward with some sort of at least analysis to find out, how that resource can be protected and maintain its both ecological and its economic force in the long term. Again, I want to just shout out to the staff who's put in so much time and effort in this. And I really believe that we need to move forward. And with the new petitions coming in, I think that's another sign that we just can't wait. Our survey was pretty clear. It said very clearly, the only thing that had almost unanimous support was the thing that we can't do as a department and as a commission is do nothing. And so I think that's the call, that's the obligation. I know there's some people that are worried about their own commercial well-being. We're worried about you too, but unless we move forward, I think in the long run, both economically and ecologically, we're going to harm the river. Attended the CAC meeting in Region 3 via Zoom, and it was also the topic of the discussion was the Madison River. And I think the take-home point, there was many really interesting things. We've been actually trying to regulate crowding on the Madison since 1958 was an interesting fact. And the regional manager brought up a point that I think bears understanding for everyone. That is, the Madison River is the most heavily fished wild trout fishery probably in the world. And no one has ever seen a wild trout fishery sustain almost 500,000 angler days a year. So we're in uncharted waters. Brings up more urgency to keep things moving. That's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Byer. Appreciate your thoughtfulness and all the work that you've done on that, and I echo those comments. Commissioner Brower.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to echo what you said and thank Commissioner Byer for the work that he did in developing those relationships with people through the whole process, and hopefully it can continue at some point. I'll be pretty brief. I think I mentioned this last year about this time, but during the summer I do work for the county spraying noxious weeds, and I get out and about quite a bit. And I just want to acknowledge the Region 6 staff and the work they do reaching out and developing some relationships with landowners. It's pretty evident by the amount of open access fields that you see, block management sign-in boxes, and I just think that needs to be commended. So I'll leave it at that. And once again, just want to acknowledge the work that they do up here developing those relationships.
Thank you, Commissioner Brower. Commissioner Aldridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really, it's been a meaningless type of an environment for me for the most part. And thank God for all the weeds I've been working on and all the deer I've been watching in the yard, along with a lot of the avian species that are very busy in our neighborhood right now. But I have had a lot of conversations, I guess, with some of the topics on the agenda that we have today. So I look forward to some discussion on some of those items that people have brought up to me and that are on the agenda as well. So anyway, I'll yield my time to the next commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Aldridge. Commissioner Stuker.
Thank you, Chairman Colton. I'd like to echo a lot of what Pat said and agree with what he said in regards to the Madison, but I'm going to disagree slightly in that the EA we had did not address the problem. As Pat said, with the lack of commercial activity on the Madison now, we are still seeing tremendous overcrowdedness and overuse of the resource, which is my number one concern, is the resource. I will disagree slightly that the department does not have a lot of information that they could not include in our next discussion of the Madison, something dealing with the non-commercial. They already know that the commercial is 13% and that the non-commercial is 87% of the use, probably higher now. They also know, and I'm getting this out of the EA, that the annual growth of the non-commercial between 2013 and 2017 annually was 16% growth in use, probably higher this year due to the virus. And they also stated in there that the biggest threat to the resource was the non-commercial use. And it's very frustrating to me that since I've been on the commission and we keep talking about this, all the department wants to bring forward, it seems, is the commercial use, but yet they readily agree in the EA, the biggest threat is the non-commercial. So I think both of those need to be addressed. Also in the EA, they said if we limited the commercial activity, it's going to fill right back in with non-commercial users. And so to me, if we're not going to address the non-commercial, we're not doing a darn thing to help the resource. And as Pat said, that's pretty evident in regards to the use that's happening now with the commercial activity being very limited. I know I've talked to a few people down there that were out and they said that. So my concern is that if we're not going to address the non-commercial, we're not really going to help the resource. So that's my 2 bits on that. The other thing is, back when we did the future fisheries funds here probably 4 months ago, I mentioned Reeser Reservoir up here had a problem. Well, since then, I found out what the problem was, and in regard is they do not have enough water rights to refill that reservoir. And BLM does not want to put $1 million into a reservoir that they may not be able to put water in. So that's kind of where the funny part comes in. I have most of the water rights on that coulee, and I am working with BLM, Fish and Wildlife, on trying to figure out how I could transfer enough of my water rights over to them so that they can fill the reservoir and start the fishery again. So we're working on that. There's a couple other alternatives, and I know like I say, I've spoken with BLM several times and different people with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks on the issue to see how we can accomplish this, because it is a fishery that a number of people in this area, Havre and Chinook and others, use. So, and again, like I say, we're going to try to work through that. And that's really all I have to say today, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stuker. Most of my phone calls and activity, of course, have been on the Madison, and certainly I recognize what the primary issue is regarding crowding, but I think it's important to remember what we've gone through in these last 2 years, and the very organized and the very loud voices who've made it clear that we go treading into that non-commercial use, that they will fight that with every fiber of their being and engage in rhetoric that is harmful and deceitful. This commission and the department has long recognized what the problem is, and this EA was the first step to work with the commercial users, and in the EA gather information under the new proposals that would allow us to address the true problem. So I do take issue with the idea that what we were doing in no way related to that, but being the department being a body that listens to the community and a commission that listens to the community, we all understood that this was a multi-step process. And if we say we're going to just not do anything until we can get our arms all the way around the non-commercial use, well, then I don't think we'll ever be able to do anything. It's been made clear time and again that if we have a discussion about pulling even one angler off that river, one regular user, that we're going to destroy the local economy. And to Commissioner Bauer's point, the sooner we get some measure of certainty for all those users, the better it will be for the entire community, the business community, and the sporting community. So I'm hoping we can proceed in some fashion. Of course, we have a lot of challenges here with COVID, but I want to commend the department for all of their efforts over the last 2 years, 2+, and particularly Director Williams, who, as you have seen, has been taking a lot of arrows, has been subject to a lot of accusations that, in my opinion, are completely unfounded. So I'm looking forward to our meeting today. We have some items on the agenda that have a little bit of controversy. We also have some very interesting items on the agenda. I'm looking forward to the next presentation in particular about use of technology in the fishing world. As I mentioned to, I called Vice Chairman Stuker earlier today. There may be a point or a couple points in the day where I have to jump off for a little bit, and I'll leave the meeting in his capable hands. So if you suddenly see me disappear, I'm not emergently running to the bathroom. I've got some items that I need to address. With that, I'll turn it over to Director Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, commissioners. Zoom seems to be our new norm, and it's nice to see your shining faces. I glad to see also, though, Mr. Chair, that you seem to be growing a healthy set of antlers there. So the pandemic must be treating you fine. So along those lines, COVID has changed our work environment, our operating environment in a number of ways. The demand for our work certainly has increased, and I think in some ways is ever more prescient, that people's ability to get outside is just that much more important to them. So at the moment, thankfully, our front offices are back open. Our front desk staff, when they interact with the public, they are using face masks. We now have these plexiglass shields up, and we have stickers in a lot of our front lobbies for social distancing, and have hand sanitizer available for everyone. So the traffic in our front offices has been steady. People really have appreciated that they are open and have been using them. We've also seen a real uptick in recreation and use of all of our sites, whether parks, fishing access sites, wildlife management areas. We're really seeing a lot of use. And so with that, that doesn't come free, meaning that we need to continue our work to keep them open, to keep the latrines clean. We've seen also an uptick in enforcement work. So good news and bad news, just more people wanting to get outside, which we love, but also more work in a challenging work environment. But people, I have to commend our staff too, have really rolled up their sleeves and have had really good attitudes and been very innovative to make sure that we continue to provide our traditional services. So we also, another bit of good news that I think Commissioner Brower, did you note that our block management contracts are in and increased in acreages, increased access across the board. So I think that's really positive. We've had a really active bears season, both grizzly bears and black bears. So a lot more work for our bear specialists, but also for enforcement. So increased activity in areas where we've not necessarily had bears before, and in the normal areas. And then on a sad note, we have found in 3 eastern Montana counties, the fungus that causes white nose syndrome in bats. So we have testing underway there. What we're not sure is whether it's somewhat like chronic wasting disease, whether it's been here longer than we realize, and we just hadn't tested for it. We have not tested bats for it yet. It's the fungus that causes white nose syndrome we found on surfaces like bridges where they roost. So we have no management response to this at this time, and more testing. And I also want to be clear that there's no evidence that white nose syndrome poses any harm to humans, livestock, or pets. So I hate to end on that note, but just rolling along, everyone's working really hard in the situation we have. And I think in most cases, we're also really grateful that we are working and that we have work to do that matters. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Williams. Okay, we'll go ahead and start with the first agenda item and turn it over to enforcement.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. Good, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Director Williams, good morning. My name is Phil Kilbreth. I'm the Operations Sergeant with the Enforcement Division, and the item I have on the agenda today is a short informational presentation on, it's essentially going to be condensed down to remote controlled devices and phishing. And so we're going to present a little bit of information and reflect on some questions that the department has received. and hopefully it will generate some discussion. So everybody will stand by. I'm going to try to share my screen. And I have a PowerPoint and a couple of videos. All right. Hopefully everybody can see this. Again, will be an informational presentation on remote control devices for fishing. The reason why I'm presenting this today on behalf of the Enforcement Division is that we do get, and in recent years have gotten more questions surrounding the use of specifically remote control devices for fishing. You can kind of condense the questions we received or the interest we've had down to three general categories, or three general questions. So first being, can an unmanned aerial vehicle, also known as a drone, be used for fishing? Can a remote control boat or an RC boat be used for fishing? And in both cases, if so, in what manner can they be used, or what limits might there be on their usage? So just to cover briefly some of the top, or some of the ways that these can be used, and I'm sure this is by no means an exhaustive listing, as people come up with things constantly, technology is always changing. But just to start with, we'll go with RC boats. A remote control boat can be used to transport bait and or lures a long distance and deposit them in a location that is beyond or behind an obstacle or beyond a distance that an angler could cast. With this particular type of fishing that I'm illustrating here, the angler would still use a rod and reel to land the fish, or a line of some sort that it had physical control over. You can see a picture right here of a boat. This is just something I pulled that they were advertising on the internet. This is this boat that's purpose designed for RC fishing, has a remote control, and it has a container you can see on top of the boat that's designed to place your lure and or bait into it. You would then drive the vessel out, or the RC boat out, to the location you wanted to fish, deploy the mechanism, which would then empty that bucket of bait and or lure into that location. Some of them have more than one bucket, one for chum, one for the lure. Once your bait or lure has been ejected from the boat, then you would be fishing in a normal manner. There has been usage of this type documented in other states, where people are using them. In a lot of cases, this is used in dams where they have a no fishing zone, and so people will use an RC boat to drive a lure or bait up below the dam into the closure zone. We have received reports of that occurring at Libby Dam, although I'm sure there's probably other locations that occurs in Montana. Another way which you could consider to be RC trolling is where they don't actually attach a rod and reel or a line to the RC boat, and instead they simply attach a lure or bait to the boat and fish by means of remote control. This particular item that I've got shown here was advertised on the internet, and that's exactly what it is. They're advertising that you can, tie your line to it, 150 feet of line or a shorter piece of line, and you can remote controlly drive this boat out into the water, or you can maneuver it behind a place. In a sense, the best analogy I can think of for this type of fishing is essentially it's like jug fishing, except the jug is remote controlled. In some cases, you would, this particular picture here, it's rated up to a 2-pound fish. You can find videos on the internet of people trying to actually land fish with the remote control boat itself, or you could use a big pole to pull it in, or take another boat out to get it, whatever the case may be. But again, this particular usage would involve not even having a line attached to it, just using the RC boat itself as, your sort of fishing rod or bobber or jug out there. Probably what we get more questions on is about drones or unmanned aerial vehicles. These devices can be used to carry a bait or a lure or fishing line a long distance. Onboard cameras film the scene below in real time and display that information to the pilot of the drone. Drones can fly at reasonably high altitudes. They can cover a lot of area and spot fish. And then a drone that has a lure or bait dangling off of it can be used to very precisely place that bait in front of feeding fish. And additionally, you could even use, as I'll show in a video, you could even just simply attach a fishing line to the drone and use it to maneuver over fish, and then actually use the drone to pull fish out of the water and land them themselves. And we have, like I said, gotten questions about this, and they seem to be coming more frequently. So I'm going to show a couple of videos. They're just YouTube videos on this particular topic. Hopefully they'll play. The first video is an advertisement for a line holding system that's designed to work with certain drones. And this system holds a fishing line under a certain amount of tension, and then the line is, if a fish takes it, the line is then pulled out of the drone and the angler lands the drone or the fish off of a conventional fishing rod. The second video is going to show a scenario where somebody's actually landing a fish using a drone. The first one is in a saltwater situation, and I think the second one's in Canada. So the first one is an advertisement for a product, but it does show a really nice, I think a good overview briefly of some of the ways these can be done. So I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint. And I'm going to go down and share my video here. Well, I guess we'll share this and do it the other way.
Crisis shows our.
Can everybody see the video?
Coronavirus hit Senator Daines
No.
for a $500 billion slush fund for big business and opposed paid sick leave for us. Tell Senator Daines to show us he values Montanans by supporting paid sick leave.
So I take it the YouTube video on the screen is not showing up. Okay, let me try this. How about now? Okay. All right, I'll play this video briefly. Okay, so again, that just gives a very basic overview of some of the ways that you could possibly use one of these devices for fishing. Again, that was done in the saltwater environment, but we've also heard of that happening in other states, targeting pike, targeting muskie, things like that. Here's a second video. Can everybody see the second video? All right, this video is going to show somebody actually using the device itself without a rod and reel attached to it. Skip.
Wish me luck.
No visuals yet. Oh, those are beds. Okay, there's a fish on each of these beds. See how close we can get. Already a bit close, you know, blowing the water and everything. Oh my goodness, he's coming for it anyways. Look at this. Oh my goodness. Oh, look at him. He's staring at it. We're right in his home. There he is. Got him. Instantly. Freaking just caught a giant bluegill. Giant bluegill. Look at the size of this bluegill. Oh, please, please, please. Oh my goodness. Come on, come on. Look at the size of this freaking bluegill. Oh my goodness. This is a freaking
All right. So without watching the rest of the video, I think that gives a pretty good description of, visual description of what those sort of things can be used for. So back to the PowerPoint. With any kind of technology, particularly with these unmanned aerial vehicles, there's likely to be other innovative ways that people come up with using these. So now my PowerPoint froze. Everybody back to seeing the PowerPoint? So when we examined these questions, we took a look at the existing law to see if we could come up with a conclusion on whether the legality of these activities. And when you look in statute, and again, these are the statutes that talk about what is a violation, a criminal violation. So there may be other definitions in law, but the ones that enforcement uses to interpret fishing. In 876101, fishing is defined as to take or harvest fish or the act of a person possessing any instrument or article or substance for the purpose of taking or harvesting fish in any location that a fish might inhabit. Now, that general definition of fishing certainly seems like either an RC boat or a drone would fit into that definition. When you read a little bit farther, there's also a statute, 876501, that lists out a variety of fishing offenses and also talks about some ways that are allowable to fish. And what's important in this is it starts by saying, except when specifically authorized by law or commission rule, a person may not fish by any means other than by a hook and single line or a single rod in hand or within immediate control. This statute also contains a variety of other sections in there that allow for different types of fishing, such as bow fishing or fishing with a spear in certain circumstances. But if you read through the statute, the important part is subparagraph D talks about it's not lawful unless allowed by commission rule or law for a person to use any gun or trap or other device to entrap, catch, capture, or take, or attempted to entrap, catch, capture, or take any game fish. So other device is a key word here. The legislature probably envisioned that there would be other devices out there that might come up when it came to fishing. And this particular language in the statute may very well cover those things. And then, of course, as the commission is well familiar, 871301 and 303 granted a commission authority to establish fishing rules for the department. So that the question is, does that section in 876501 that say other device, is that clear? You can say it's not clear for addressing RC boats, drones, or maybe it is clear. Maybe that would be considered another device. When considering sort of what a person would be doing with, say, a drone or an RC boat, you could make the argument that that person is using that device to carry their fishing tackle to a location that they couldn't cast with or cast to. But along that, and so therefore perhaps that would be using another device to fish. But a counter argument to that a person could consider would also be that a downrigger or a planer board would be doing the exact same thing, carrying fishing tackle to a place that you wouldn't normally be able to fish or troll in from a boat. So it's not, it could be considered very clear in that case, but there's also arguments to say that it's not. But 876501 that talks about another device does provide the commission authority to regulate that activity. So just by way of a couple other existing rules and laws that Montana does have that talk about at least drones anyways, unmanned aerial vehicles. There is a state law that prohibits a drone from being flown near wildfire operation and also prohibiting law enforcement from using a drone to gather evidence without a search warrant. In 2018, the commission also refined the language to regulate unmanned aerial vehicles used during hunting and prohibit them from being used from locating game. Although there was also a statute that we basically mirrored that talks about aircraft for that same purpose being used to spot game for hunting. And then in 2016, the Parks Board prohibited both unmanned aerial vehicle and RC aircraft from being operated in state parks without permission from the department. So there are some regulations that sort of go around this particular topic. And so the question today is bringing this informational piece to the commission to talk about is, as an agency and as a division, we're committed to being proactive in addressing things that come up or even addressing possible future issues. And so we're eager to come up with some sort of a proposal to present to the commission for regulating these devices, or depending on how the commission feels, we may already be able to use the existing law. And so the question or the conversation for the commission is, would the commission like to see a proposal that addresses these issues? And if so, what should that proposal address? And with that, I am open to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbreth. Interesting presentation. I appreciate your efforts on that. Are there any questions for Mr. Gilbreth from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, not really a question, more of an observation. It was a very interesting presentation, and I appreciate seeing that. I guess I would go on record as saying I would very much oppose any use of the drones in the manner that was shown in the video. We do not allow it for hunting. And I guess my feeling is if the use of technology gets into one area, whether it's the angling or the hunting, it's not long that it could get into the other side. And if you can use a drone to go out and spot the fish and catch them and take the fish, how long is it before someone wants to use the drone and mount a rifle and go out and shoot an elk or locate the elk with it, which we do not allow now. So I'm very much opposed to allowing drones for any of these manners in the archery. And if we do not have enough statutory limitations put in or commission rule, I think we should adopt one. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stuker. Commissioner Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbreth. I appreciate your presentation. Very interesting topic. My question for you and your wardens across the state is whether you feel like it's, as worded, the statute gives you the authority to cite people who do not, or who do use a remote control vehicle or drone.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Byer, that's an interesting question. I think when you read the statute that talks about other devices and you think about, the example of a drone carrying a bait to another location, and think about that in terms of just some of the other technology like a planer board or a downrigger or something like that. I personally think that it would be difficult to bring a case before a jury that said that with the current law, the way it's written, would actually be unlawful because it just says other device. And if you think about the person still has a line in their hand, they're still ultimately controlling it. It's just that device is being used to carry a bait or a lure to a different location, just like a downrigger would. I would have a difficult time with that.
Thank you. Further questions from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I have had experience with the remote controlled boats over on the North Fork of the Clearwater River, below Dvorak Dam. And there was one boat that lined up with all the others in front of the dam at the required distance on the line. And this individual could take his little boat and haul his equipment, his lure or bait or whatever, up to the bottom of the dam and then bring it on back. And so he was fishing in territory that nobody else was fishing. So it created a lot of anxiety and angst, I guess, amongst the people that were anchored, side by each with that individual. But certainly my personal feeling is that the earlier we recognize the potential of some of these things and put rule or statute in place regardless of whatever we can and will do, the better off we're going to be. I don't think we ought to allow this kind of activity to grow on us and be something that becomes a run-of-the-mill type of technology for so-called fishing or hunting.
Thank you. Commissioner Brower.
I would kind of echo what Commissioner Stuker said, and I think it needs to be very specifically addressed that it should not be able to be used. I mean, I know that some vagueness in the law sometimes is nice to cover areas, but it seems with these drones, it's just better to be very specific. I mean, I could imagine somebody would get creative and be able to drop some sort of net. I mean, you could imagine them dropping a net on a fish over a spawning bed or something. I mean, it just seems like it would be easier just to say, no, these are not allowed.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate all those comments, and I'm in agreement with them. I think the commission does have the authority, to adjust these regulations and to limit the use of these types of technologies, not just in our fishing regulations, but we have authority to put in regulations that are designed to limit conflict between hunters and anglers. And, the example Tim uses, we think about the use of this maybe on some of our other waters, some of our crowded trout streams and a drone flying down. I think we have the authority there as well. And, I appreciate, the comparison to a downrigger or planer boards or something, but, those are essentially based off ancient technology people have been using a long time for hundreds of years. They're just now made out of plastic and carbon fiber and you're still engaged in the process. This is a very detached way to harvest fish. And while it might be groovy to post to YouTube on that, we've seen time and time again how that activity to capture that kind of interesting shot and to get on YouTube creates conflict with other anglers and hunters and once again it's a very small fraction of our sporting community that wants to catch fish like that. And I think we need to always be cognizant of who funds this and keeping our participation up from those people. So I would certainly have no hesitation in asking legal and enforcement to look at, drafting some proposed regulations to limit this technology. What we've seen in other technologies and what our neighboring states have seen is that these trade groups, whether it's crossbows or other technologies, they have some powerful influence out there, and you can suddenly get these devices out on the landscape before anybody has a chance to get their arms around it. And then you're telling people, okay, we're going to take that away. That becomes a bigger problem than trying to limit it up front. And I think we know here in Montana, we've been very strict on the technologies we allow for harvesting fish and game, more so than a lot of our neighboring states. Our crossbow regulations being one of those, you know, camera usage, even down to more traditional methods of, you know, we don't bait bears. And I think Montanans take that very seriously and are proud that, you know, the sport that they all engage in is done with a way that's as traditional as possible. So I guess if I look to legal and to enforcement for what they specifically need from us in order to move forward in some fashion.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think today's conversation was a good starting point, and we can work on crafting a proposal to bring forward in the future.
Thank you. Again, thanks for the presentation. Let's go ahead and move on to fisheries.
Morning, Commissioners, Chair Colton, Director Williams. Fisheries has 3 short items this morning. The first item we have is a temporary closure on the Clark Fork River in Region 2. This is a proposal for a temporary river closure on the Clark Fork River. The closure is due to safety concerns related to the replacement of the Conley Avenue Bridge by MDT and Deer Lodge. The actual river closure would be required only in the proximity of the bridge site, which is about 100 feet upstream and downstream. The MDT anticipates that there will be times when construction activities will create unsafe conditions for the public and requests that FWP be prepared to temporarily close the river on a short-term basis to all use in the proximity of the construction site. The construction is scheduled for between June 2021 and November 2021. FWP would be notified prior to the occurrence of each closure. Closures will be considered only in the interest of public safety and if there are no other reasonable alternatives. We recommend the Commission propose a rule and initiate the public process.
Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move the Commission propose an annual rule authorizing FWP in consultation with the local commissioner to temporarily close a portion of the Clark Fork River on a short-term basis as may be necessary to safely complete removal of the existing bridge and construction of a new bridge on Conley Avenue during the time period of June 1st, 2021 to November 30th, 2021.
Mr. Chairman, I would second that motion.
We have a motion and second. Any comments or questions from the commission? I will ask if there's any comment from the public on this. And again, if people want to comment, they need to dial *9 and that will raise your hand in the queue to make comment.
Chair Colton, members of the commission, this is Katie Gainstead. I'm seeing no public comments.
Okay, seeing none, back to the commission. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Nixon Bridge.
This item is similar to the previous one. This is for a temporary river closure on the Gallatin River in Region 3 due to replacement of the Nixon Bridge near Manhattan by Gallatin County. Construction is scheduled to start this summer. Closure of the river would occur only in the area of construction and only as necessary in the interest of public safety when no other alternatives are available. Again, the department recommends the commission approve the proposed rule and initiate the public comment period.
I call for the motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the commission approve an annual rule authorizing FWP in consultation with the local commissioner to temporarily close a portion of the Gallatin River on a short-term basis as necessary to safely complete removal of the existing bridge and construction of a new Nixon Gulch Bridge during summer 2020.
Mr. Chairman, I'll second the motion.
A motion and a second. Any questions, comments from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, just real quickly, I appreciate that the closure is limited in scope and breadth. So it's hopefully going to be, looks like it'll be the exception and maintain this popular access site or area for floating safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Byer. Any other comments or questions from the commission? Any comments from the public?
Chair Colton, seeing none.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. Confluentus Corner FAS.
This is our final item this morning. This is a final for acquisition of 40 acres on the Lower Thompson River to be managed as an undeveloped walk-in fishing access site. The site is about 5 miles east of Thompson Falls. It contains intact upland and riparian habitat with about 2,500 feet of river frontage along both banks. Purchase of this site would be funded with $150,000 from Avista Corps, $100,000 from Northwestern Energy, $40,000 from FWP, and $5,000 from the West Slope chapter of Trout Unlimited. The department received 13 public comments on the proposed acquisition during the EA process. All issues raised by those who commented are addressed in the decision notice, and all public comments were generally supportive of the acquisition. The department recommends the commission approve the purchase of this 40-acre property along the banks of the Lower Thompson River so the area can be used and enjoyed by the recreating public in perpetuity.
Thank you, Eileen. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the commission approve FWP's purchase of the Confluentus Corner FAS on Thompson River.
I'll second.
A motion and second. Questions or comments from the commission? Any comments or questions from the public? Again, *9 if you want to raise your hand.
Chair Colton, members of the commission, it looks like we do have someone who would like to comment.
Thank you. Go ahead and identify yourself and provide your comment, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. My name is Clayton Elliott, ELLIOTT, representing Montana Trout Unlimited. We stood in support of this project previously, and I know it's the final today. So I will be brief and just reiterate our support, and on behalf of the West Slope chapter as well, we're excited about this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Further comment from the public?
Commissioners, this is Nick Jivak, and I'm with the Montana Wildlife Federation. And I just would also like to express our support for this. I know our local affiliate up there, Flathead Wildlife, is strongly supportive of this, and this will benefit obviously fishing access site, but also some wildlife with some bighorns in that area. So we think it's a great project, and we can use more accesses in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jivak. Further public comment?
Chair Colton, members of the commission, it looks like that's it.
Okay, I'll send it back to the commission. All in those, if there are any more questions or comments, I apologize, from the commission. Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We'll move on to wildlife.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Director Williams. The first topic that we have for wildlife this morning is the final approval of the chronic wasting disease plan. I'm Brian Wakeling. I'm the game chief for for the record. So the plan was shared at the April Commission meeting. We have taken public comment on that. What we have before you today is the same, essentially this, well, it is identically the same plan that was presented earlier. We have identified some of the changes that occurred during the revision process. We shared that with the public as well. There have been no changes since this draft was shared with the commission. We have received a few comments on the plan, but none of the comments that we received, we didn't deem any of them essential to amend the plan as a result of that. And so we have before you not only the plan, but also the final language for the disposal requirements that would become part of the rule. That language is, again, essentially, it is identical to what was presented to the commission in April. And, you know, like I say, there are no changes, and I'm prepared to try to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Wakeling. Are there any, before we have a motion, are there any questions about the plan or the revised plan that was presented to us in April?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Mr. Wakeling. Mr. Wakeling, I noticed that since the draft plan was circulated, we've had an incident documented in Gallatin County. I didn't see that was added into the plan. Is it necessary to do so at this point?
You know, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Byerth, I don't believe it's essential that we identify each of those detections. I think it's important that we keep track of those. And a lot of the amendments that occurred, you know, especially looking at the disposal language and the ability to address disposals throughout the state and not just within specific zones, is largely in response to that. What we're likely going to see as this develops is additional detections are certainly potential. It's the kind of information that the department is definitely going to keep track of, certainly going to continue to share. But if we were to need to amend the plan each time that we had an additional detection, I think we would be before the commission on a pretty regular basis.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
I was more curious, especially related to the geographic spread and the locations of the targeted surveillance areas. In Region 3, southwestern Montana, there's obviously a target around part of Madison County near Sheridan. And I just wondered if the plan is equipped then to expand those targeted areas and the buffer zones without amending the plan each time.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Byerth, again, good question. Our intent is to routinely change our surveillance areas annually so that we are constantly doing some additional surveillance and detection. In addition, we're also willing to accept any samples at any time from any of the hunters at this point in time. So if someone wants to have their head tested, after any samples that are collected, we're certainly going to incorporate that as well. And so I believe that it's adequately addressed in the plan. I think our intent is still to continue to monitor and to shift that monitoring and focus that monitoring in different parts of the state annually.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that the commission adopt the revised Montana Chronic Wasting Disease Management Plan, the proposed carcass disposal rule, and the prohibited of cervid-derived glandular scents as presented by the department as final.
I would second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
The motion is second. This is a final, so no public comment. I'll ask if there's, before the vote, any further questions or comments from the commission. Again, great work, Wildlife Department and others for putting this all together. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We'll move on to non-game checkoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Director Williams. Again, Brian Wakeling with the Game Bureau as for the record. I'll be presenting the non-game checkoff plan. Essentially, what you're seeing before you again is identical to what the commission heard in May. There has been, basically, there's 4 projects where the intent is to spend $80,000 across those 4 projects. There has been 2 public comments that we received. My understanding of those comments have been supportive of the plan. There are no changes, again, to what you're seeing now as to what you had seen in May. And I think if you have any questions, we can try to address those.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Mr. Wakeling from the commission? I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the commission approve the proposed non-game tax checkoff work plan for fiscal year 2021.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. This is again a final. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Next item.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes.
may. On the original one where we did the law enforcement presentation on the control devices, it
Yes.
did say on the cover sheet that public comment would be allowed. And we did not, so there's probably nobody out there, but it might not hurt to ask.
Thank you, Commissioner Stuker. I missed that. Yeah, I would ask, I know there are some folks watching. I apologize for that. Is there any comment on enforcement's presentation on technologies and in particular the direction provided by the commission? Again, star 9. And thank you again, Rich, for catching that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm seeing no comments.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next agenda item, please.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Director Williams. Brian Wakeling with Game Bureau for the record. With the mountain lion quotas, the 2020 mountain lion quotas, this was shared with the commission in April. At that time, we'd identified 5 changes that we are proposing within Region 3 on their mountain lion quotas, and another 2 through Region 4. We have not recommended any additional changes to this, what was originally proposed. I should acknowledge that there was substantial public comment. We received no fewer than 32 comments from the public. A lot of the comment, while there was a small number that was in support of mountain lion proposals, a large number of the comment largely was in opposition to just mountain lion hunting in general. And those comments came in from a variety of locations around the nation. Based on the, looking at those comments, it's certainly a valid social perspective. But for the most part, the comments that I've observed didn't address this from a biological perspective. And although oftentimes the comments were they'd like to see reduced quotas or no quotas, so one could argue there was a biological underpinning, there was no biological description or analysis that would question what the department has recommended at this point in time. The notable exception was some of the comments received from the Mountain Lion Foundation. However, I would also argue that the department's recommendation is based on sound biology. Consequently, the department did not make any amendments to the recommendations that based on the comments that we received. We did present this, as I mentioned, in April, no changes, and certainly willing to try to address any questions the commission may have.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and ask for the motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the commission adopt as final the 2020 mountain lion quotas and subs quotas as presented by the department.
I'll second.
A motion and second. This is a final and there are no proposed changes. Are there any questions or comments from the commission? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Moving on to the next mountain lion item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Director Williams, Brian Wakeling, Game Bureau Chief for the record. The next topic deals with a change that was proposed to deal with the surplus sale of special lion licenses. These would be leftover ones that had not been, no avenue to allocate any leftover licenses that might have existed at the end of the quota draw. This was presented to the commission in April. I have not found any public comment that we have received on this to date. The proposal is identical to what the commission saw in April. I would certainly be happy to try to address any questions you might have.
Thank you. And can I get a motion, please?
Mr. Chairman, I move the commission adopt as final the proposed changes allowing unsuccessful special lion license applicants the ability to purchase a surplus special lion license as presented by the department.
I'll second the motion.
Been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments from the commission? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. Non-resident hound handler permits.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Director Williams. Brian Wakeling, Game Bureau Chief for the record. Again, this is another item that the commission heard in April. The rule that the department prepared to deal with the issuance of non-resident hound handler licenses, direct result of legislation during the 2019 session. The proposal largely provides a method by which a limited number, up to 35 Class D4 licenses may be authorized and issued to a non-resident to use hounds during a season for mountain lions. No more than 2 in any unit. There was substantial, not as much comment here as it was on the quotas. A lot of the public comment that we received on this proposal largely dealt with either satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the legislation and really didn't address the proposed regulation that we have before you. There was, however, one comment that might have been iterated more than once that even with such a small number of licenses and with some of the restrictions that might be associated with those, there is the possibility that there could be a leftover hound handler license. And so what the comment that we received from the public suggested was that We consider the ability to surplus those licenses if indeed there was a leftover license. And we agreed with that comment. We thought that was a good idea. And so we've made that change in this proposal. There are, however, some incidences or some restrictions on how that might be used. For instance, if you're drawn, you have to be drawn for a license in some cases, in addition to the D4 license. And so if you were a surplus D4 license, it wouldn't be available to just everybody. It would be only available to anybody who also had a license for mountain lions in those instances. And so under those circumstances, under those conditions, we thought it would be an appropriate tool that might be, we would want to include. And although we did not explicitly exclude that from the first proposal, we wanted to make sure that it was included in this. So that's the only change to the proposal based on, in comparison with what you had seen in April.
Thank you. So again, for clarification, even though this is more explicitly outlined, it's really not a change from the April proposal. Is that position of the department?
It's not a change, it's a clarification.
I think I'll go ahead and request public comment anyway. But if I could first get a motion from the commission.
Mr. Chair, I move the Fish and Wildlife Commission approve the implementation of HB 311 by holding the first drawing for 35 Class D-4 licenses with no more than 2 Class D-4 licenses issued in any single district in the 2020 coherent with other big game drawings in which all line districts can be applied and surplus Class D-4 licenses are made available to eligible applicants through surplus sale as presented by the department.
I'll second the motion.
Motion second. Any questions or comments from the commission?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wakeling, just to clarify, I think this was brought up when this was originally proposed. I know that there was a concern about individuals who had drawn a lion tag that then did not draw one of these hound licenses. That really was because of House Bill 311, that was kind of outside of the commission's hands though, correct? Is that correct in saying so?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brower, that's my understanding as well.
Any further questions from the commission? Rich.
Mr. Chairman, my question would be, we're going to have data that could be presented to the commissioners in a year on how many of those instances may or may not have happened in regards to Commissioner Brower's statement or question.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Stuker, I have a little bit of difficulty answering that question. I don't have any additional information with me at this point in time that I could accurately address that. It's certainly something I can look into.
Thank you. My real concern is I'd like to know how many buy the license but does not draw the permit after the first go around. So if it's something that may need to be addressed either by the legislators or because I guess my concern is, as I understand it, they have to buy the license. I believe a non-resident somewhere around $329. And if they do not get the permit, then they're not allowed to bring their animals in, and we do not reimburse that amount, as I understand it.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Stuker, that's something that we can research and certainly provide a more definitive answer than I'm able to provide at this point in time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'm not sure if someone may see someone connecting, trying. I'm not sure if they can provide an answer.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, it's not
Is-
something
is-
that I need right now. It's just something as we move after the first year.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll just keep tabs on that for us and because we do need to track that to figure out if the scenario that Rich described would take place and how often. And I think that data is easily captured. And I'm getting the thumbs up from Quentin, which is always a good sign. So there's no further comments or questions from the commission. I will see if there's any particular comment on the one item that was slightly adjusted. It's not a true change, but we have a little bit of time. Any comment from the public?
Mr. Chairman, I'm seeing none.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Back to the commission. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 It's 10:15. The next item on the agenda is going to be a little bit of a longer presentation and probably a longer discussion. What's the desire of the commission? Should we take 10 or 15 minutes before this next item?
Mr. Chairman, we're well ahead of schedule. I would say, yes, let's take 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay, let's resume at 10:30 then. Okay, everybody's back. It's 10:30 on the nose. Let's go ahead and resume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, and Director Williams. My name is Brian Wakely. I'm with the Game Bureau Chief for the record. The next item that we have are for Commission's consideration is the 2020 fur bearer trapping regulations and quotas. The proposed regulations have very few changes when compared with last year's. There are essentially two changes that are being considered, being proposed before the commission today. I should point out that this is the first time the commission is hearing this. This is a proposed, and so the department will accept public comment on this following the commission meeting today. And our intention is to come back with a final document for the commission's consideration in August. The two proposed changes both deal with Swift Fox. Swift Fox in Trapping District 6 currently has an eastern boundary that does not align with our deer elk hunting districts. It was initially established as a reduced trapping area for Swift Fox that would help facilitate some of the tribal work that was going on to the east, trying to restore Swift Fox. In the interim, there have been some fox caught in between there and as a non-target. The reintroduction efforts had largely ceased about 2010, and the population seems to be doing well. And at this point, the department does not consider that there's any biological reason not to consider simplifying the regulation so that it aligns with that, the eastern boundary of the deer elk hunting district in 670. In addition, there is a recommended reduction to the season length. Currently, that season runs through March 1st, and the commission or the department proposes to the commission that we consider reducing that to January 15th. By reducing it to January 15th, that's a period of time that's largely outside of the breeding period for those animals, and so provides some protection to breeding pairs. In addition, currently between 80 and 90% of the harvest occurs prior to January 15th, and that should have, it aligns well with the biological time frame, and the extended range allows for a little greater area in which trapping can occur. We're not proposing any change to the quota. The quota is still 10 animals, a relatively conservative number. There's been recent analyses of the international analysis of the population status. Our assessment is that this level of harvest can be sustained. One other aspect that I should point out, it's my understanding that the commission provided the department with direction back in October to explore setbacks around trails and roads for a variety of, for the trapping implementation and trapping use. The department was not able to actually implement that as directed, and want to acknowledge that up front. It doesn't mean we've discounted that. It is something that we do plan to pursue, but I wanted to be upfront and acknowledge that we did not complete that task as directed by the commission. With that, I'd be willing to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wakeling. Are there questions from before I call for the motion, I'd like to know if there's any questions or likewise any comments by the commission on the proposal.
Mr. Chairman, this is Commissioner Aldrich and Mr. Wakeling. You didn't have the luxury of being at that meeting last October, and there were a lot of discussions about setbacks and alternatives to setbacks and one thing and another. And so the two substantive issues on the agenda today for us in terms of the box are very much appreciated. I just wonder, I know I've talked to the public, not a lot of people in the public, and also a number of people in the department, about where we might be today, with this effort, to come up with these areas, where we might have the type of activities we want to restrict, trapping. We even have one organization that's submitted a proposal, some areas, before we got very far off the ground. But could you, I think it would really be helpful to me and to other commissioners and certainly to the public if you could share, what we've done to date on this part of finding these areas and what we're working with and what some of the specific processes might be. I mean, you mentioned meetings and so forth, but it seems to me like this might be a collaborative effort that would be difficult at this time at best, but still it's going to take that. But can you give me some information on where you are and some specifics about how this might move forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Aldrich, very good question. So my understanding is somewhat limited simply with my tenure here so far. But let me try and explain a little bit about how we got where we are today and some of our plans going forward. When the commission provided that direction in October, the department was still very much in the intent was to go forward specifically as directed. That period between October and early to mid-January tends to be a very busy time for a lot of our staff that would routinely be involved with this. The intent was to engage with the land management agencies. A lot of land management agencies, federal land management agencies in particular, have the ability to place a number of restrictions out. And in some cases, they're encouraged to do so, but the challenge we see with the implementation through a lot of the federal approach often is inconsistent and can differ dramatically and be confusing for an end user when it differs from one ranger district to another. But having said that, we wanted to be able to engage with them and at least get their input and get their idea on where where it would be appropriate. They certainly have gotten a lot of information on recreational visitor days in certain instances. And so our first goal was to meet with them and to have those discussions with those. Because the period of activity where it's a lot, tends to be really busy, tends to run through mid-January. The intent was to have those meetings shortly thereafter. Also, after getting some of that initial input from some of the land management agencies, we wanted to go out and have some public meetings and be able to have conversations with organizations, and there's a wide variety of perspectives, what level of recreational use presents challenges for and would necessitate a trapping setback over other, and so we didn't want to just simply, we wanted to engage in dialogue. We didn't want to just simply take public input through a written standpoint. Unfortunately, with the onset of the coronavirus pandemic and some of the challenges that associated with that, we weren't able to implement the plan that we had at that point in time. And so we are still in the process right now. That essentially shut down our ability to do that. We did have some public input. We've had some suggestion. We've had comments from specific, better input from some specific portions of our land management agencies. But at this point, we don't have and have not been able to get a consistent set of input that we can then consider in a kind of a open framework that we can consistently address across the entire range of potential places where a setback might be considered. So what our intent going forward, and we're still trying to learn how, despite the fact that meetings like this are becoming much more routine through the use of the technology that we have available to us, trying to engage the public with a similar approach. We're still exploring and still trying to figure out how to effectively engage the public. So our intent going forward is still very similar. Our intent is to basically use this the next year as a reset so that we can actually hopefully engage with the federal agencies. And I think we can probably do that very effectively through a platform similar to this one, whereby we can engage in open dialogue and try and set some basic standards. And then we're going to have to develop a way to actually move forward to get that input from the public in an effective manner such that we can get a sense of how we can implement this and make a recommendation to the commission at a future date.
Thank you, Mr. Wakely.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments before I call for the motion?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I may. I understand your short tenure there and the difficulties with the virus and whatnot, but I would be remiss if I didn't say I am very disappointed in the department because we led the public to believe that at this meeting, we would be addressing these issues. And we're not. And now I'm being told, correct me if I'm wrong, that we're probably out another 2 years with your plan due to everything that's sitting there before this will be addressed. Because you say you're going to have a year to address the other agencies and then try to talk to the public after that. So to me, I think that process needs to be speeded up if any way possible for some of these high use recreational areas that we do not require setbacks at this time. Whether we put them in on a temporary basis, and I know when you put them in, it's tough to get them out, but I do think we promised the public we would do something, and waiting 3 years to me is not fulfilling that promise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vice Chairman Stuker. All I can say is that I sincerely apologize on behalf of the department. We take your direction very seriously. I would like to address your concern about 2 years out, and that was not my intent. It is my intent that we can definitely try to address that more rapidly. My hope is that with little innovation, we may be here no more than a year from now with a recommendation that we can take forward and try to address it more rapidly than that. And so if I gave you the impression that I was trying to push this off for another 2 years, I apologize again. That was not my intent.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I may have misunderstood what you said, but that seemed to be what the timeline indicated. And I would appreciate your efforts to get this taken care of as quick as possible. And I know that you're very busy and very new to the position here in Montana, and all of that adds to the difficulties that you have in getting this accomplished. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if I might add, this is Quentin.
Yes, Chief Kujala.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Stuker, Director Williams, Quentin Kujala for the record. And again, I would restate, thank you for your comment points made, Commissioner Stuker, and the rest of the commission in the piece of the conversation here in front of us right now. I would restate Brian's apology. We know that people had expectations on both sides, on all sides of this issue. And to be very clear, it is our intent, and we will be here this time next year, recognizing the cycle of fur bearer season review in front of the commission and the attending public, with that list of proposed routes, trails, roads that do or don't have setbacks. I would further add, we're not going to, we have an obligation, we have a responsibility, we have intent, and we will respond to that end, even if that means we have to back up to nothing but remote platforms. Us not doing it again because we can't find face-to-face won't work. It's clear that missing that expectation twice isn't an option. So we don't yet see that as the necessary step. We still are looking for some face-to-face, respecting social distancing and that sort of thing. And maybe to put a little more detail on that idea is, some of this we think, given the conversation, given the people that want to express their values here and the decision that needs to be made, it comes down in some cases to having a map on the wall, a graphic on the wall or on the table where people can talk about their experiences, talk about their assessment of, yeah, that use is certainly warranting this or that decision. And so it's for the topic itself, for the conversation itself, that we've thought about being very deliberate to those sorts of ends. It may well be that at the end, we can't get comfortable with social distancing and whatever COVID throws at us from now until then. And we have to back up to more remote platforms to have that conversation. And if that's the case, again, the commitment here is today, we will back up. We won't do again what we did here. And we won't spend a lot of time assessing whether or not the way we'd like to do it. If that's not possible, then we'll quickly move to Plan B. We do think Plan B is a little lesser of an option, but we'll get there. Thank you for your patience. Sorry to miss the expectation.
Thank you.
Further comments or questions from the commission before I call for a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brown.
So, Mr. Wakeling, so the process, would it be just to identify specific trails? I mean, the trails are slipping my mind, but it seems to me there are some trail systems around Missoula that are currently have setback rules or close trapping. So would it be similar to that, identifying specific areas, and how do you see those areas being identified?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brower, good question. I do see it being very similar to that, the way it's laid out. The way I see it being identified is trying to pick some objective measures that we might be able to look at. Recreational visitor days, timing of those recreational visitor days, conflicts that have been observed, and trying to find some consistent way of addressing it from that perspective, and then noticing it essentially the way the setbacks currently are.
Yeah, go ahead, thanks.
You're on mute still, Quentin.
Those are my best comments too. I'll try again. Thank you. Sorry for that.
We finally figured out a way to mute Quentin.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brower, Director Williams, a great question. And if I may add, in a positive way, in a supporting way to Brian's comments, you all have all been in this conversation, and that to date, it's been a definition, this road or route by this definition. And so that's required an element of interpretation, interpretation by department staff, interpretation that person, whether they're a trapper or not a trapper at that trailhead, or where the road is gated. Okay, where does this route fit in that definition? And that, so it's been a case, if I may say, of one size doesn't fit all. And perhaps that's maybe been the most fundamental issue in this topic is, and if you look across the regulation booklet, that is to say the the decisions that the commission's made, I think you can arguably say it's been a constant chase for a better and better definition. And so one of the fundamental things here, to Commissioner Brower's question, is trying to take that cookie cutter approach, that one size fits all, thinking that a common definition would work, down to the very specific details. And the way that we are thinking that will manifest up, and the way we understood the commission conversation in October, so that's the identification of specific routes, be those routes trails or roads. And so rolling it forward to the end user, it's not having to interpret a definition, but it's having a list of specific routes. You compare that list down to where your stomping grounds are and memorize those, or put that list in your back pocket, no interpretation needed. And again, it allows those tailored, those site-specific conversations to happen as people talk about the level of use they experience. And so, and I just wanted to add that in because it's a little bit of the history and it's a little bit of rolling forward. It's that sort of local detail that we look to discuss as best we can in open house sort of settings, if that helps. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Chairman, for me barging in.
Any further comments or questions from the commission? Of course, this is an issue we've been grappling with a lot, and we grappled with the definition of closed roads and trails extensively. And our fix was to send this out. I certainly understand the pressures the department's under during biennial season setting, and how our calendar lays out, and then COVID bring everything kind of a screeching halt as we tried to figure out a way to communicate with one another and to facilitate meetings. As we, assuming we put the recommended proposal out, since it really, the definition stays the same as it was previously, we're still going to be receiving a lot of comment on that particular portion from now until late on July 28th, 2020. And it seems that if the land agencies, the federal land agencies, are staffed back up, we could at least begin some of those conversations with them, so that they have a better understanding of our concerns. We have a better understanding of how they want to participate and be involved, and how they analyze the problem, or whether it is in fact a problem for them. If we make adjustments, and in particular, if we start, singling out particular areas and setting exceptions to the overall definition. So I would encourage that to begin now. Anyway, I think that's reasonable. We have a bureau chief in place, and we didn't for an extended period of time, and it was a particularly long, not long, but involved season setting this year once again. Same period as always. Of course, we have to travel over the state in the worst possible weather. So with that, I would call for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move the commission adopt for public comment Department's fur bear conservation and trapping regulations proposal as presented, with all other aspects to remain unchanged except for regular calendar rotation unless addressed in other proposals.
I would second the motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioners Brower and Vice Chairman Stuker. Any comments, questions, discussion from the commission before I open it up to take public comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. I see Scott Thompson must be there from Region 6, and I know we've had a lot of conversation about the setbacks, but I had a good conversation with him explaining the moving of the boundaries on the Swift Fox, and just for the public to hear, I think it would be good so that they understand the rationale behind that, and how maybe there could have been a Swift Fox caught in that kind of area that was not counted towards the quota. If Scott wouldn't mind addressing that, I would like people to hear that conversation.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Brower. Yeah, the boundary as it currently is is along a rock creek, which is an area that maybe is not well known by the public trappers. It's easy to not recognize the boundary, and we have had incidental take outside of the swift fox trapping area. And what happens then is those animals are not counted against the quota, and there's been a handful through the years. By expanding the boundary eastward, those animals would then go against the quota appropriately. And it also aligns the boundary with the common highway that's also used for our deer elk hunting districts. So it makes a lot of sense biologically, socially, and we have swift fox dispersed all across that area right now. So like it's a good time to do that. And Fort Peck Tribe Fish and Game also agrees that this is a good move.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Thompson, and thank you for the work on this. It certainly makes sense to me what you put together here. Further comments, questions, or discussion from the commission before I go to the public? Seeing none, this of course is the beginning of the public comment period. We'll be accepting comment through the end of the business day on July 28, 2020. Remember *9 to raise your hand and be acknowledged. State your name, where you're from, and any organization with which you're affiliated. And I'll go ahead and call for public comment.
Mr. Chairman, this is Kate Gainstead. I have unmuted someone. Phone number ending in 028.
Yeah, and the individual whose phone number is in 028, we can't hear you, but you've been open to talk with.
Is that me?
The commission.
Hello?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, we can hear you now.
Commissioners, a question on this that I think is important. You do block management all the time as part of how you deal with wildlife. And as part of block management, there's safety zones that are set aside.
Commission and Chairman, can our guest please state his name and where he's from, please?
This is Stephen Capra.
Mr. Kaplan, we're having trouble hearing you. Maybe you could speak more directly into the microphone or your phone.
I'm right here. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
This is Stephen Capra with Footloose, Montana. And the question I have for you is that you work often in your game management through block management procedures. With block management comes and the question I have for you is that you work often in your game management through yeah, this is not a great process.
We can hear.
If you can hear me now,
we can hear you at times, so we can't at others, Mr. Kaplan. That's.
What I'm trying to say is that with the block management, you also have safety zones. And the question is, why aren't we looking at this through the lens of safety zones in and around our urban centers? These are clearly areas that need to have safety zones, and it shouldn't just be trailed.
not picking up any of that comment, Mr. Kappa.
Chairman, this is
Yes.
Donna. If Mr. Kappa is listening to YouTube and trying to comment on the phone, that might be a conflict with technology.
Yeah, because we have the delay. We're not picking up any of that comment, Mr. Kappa.
Well, as I said before, can you hear me now, Commissioner?
Yes, yes.
Can you hear
Go
me?
ahead.
So what I'm trying to say is that you manage wildlife through block management often across the state. And what I'm saying is with block management also comes, in some cases, safety zones. And those safety zones are to protect the public. Why are we not looking at this through the lens of safety zones in and around urban communities that include more than just trails, that include whole areas that should be set off limits for the public safety? You use safety zones in your hunting management. We should be using safety zones in our trapping management.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kappa. That's a thoughtful comment, and I think we were able to capture that. Of course, we'll be taking, for over another month here, and would encourage you to reach out to us individually as well as through the normal channels of commenting on directly to the commission via email. Further public comment, again, it's *9, and please identify yourself in the beginning of the call. Thank you. I'm not picking up. I see the caller ending in 170 has been allowed in, but we're not picking up anything.
Oh, I think that's me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly.
Oh, good. This is Casey York, president of Trap Free Montana Public Lands out of the Bitterroot. Chairman Colton, commissioners, Director Williams. Regarding changing the closing date on Swift Fox, that is generally by the date the quota is reported met anyhow. Looking at recent years, pardon me?
Hey, how are you?
I'm sorry, I can't, can you not hear me?
Yes,
You're
we
good.
can.
Okay, I heard some voices and I didn't know. So just interrupt if you can't hear me. What I was saying is, looking at recent years, the quota of 10 has been met of the Swift Fox by January 9th, by January 10th. According to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, though, Swift Fox breed in late December to early January. In the northern parts of the respective regions, they may breed as late as early February. With climate change, we could anticipate the earlier. Young are born typically late February to early March. What is especially important is that the juveniles are known to disperse to new areas just before the breeding season. Montana's Swift Fox trapping season begins November 1st, and therefore correlates with these critical periods for dispersal to recolonize historic ranges, and likely covers their necessary reproductive period for genetic enhancement and population goal increases. Swift fox reportedly have been reduced to less than 40% of their historic range. Of approximately 1,200 that were reintroduced, Montana opened a trapping season on them in 2010. 5 years later, preliminary census results had the Swift fox at only 175. Final numbers told by FWP put them at an estimated 347. Still a significant decline. Why are they even still being trapped? Swift fox are not a public threat. They're not a nuisance. They're not endangering to livestock. Their pelt value at best, if it can even be found, is about $7. The cost for reintroduction range from $950 to $5,300 per Swift fox. The argument that they are getting trapped anyhow in coyote trap sets, well, only one Swift fox was reported in Montana in 2008, none in 2009, and this was prior to the first trapping season on Swift fox in 2010. The quota reports aren't again in sync with the voluntary trapper harvest reports. For example,
What is the reasoning for not wanting us to commenting on that?
Excuse me.
I can't remember.
I'm hearing voices. Hello?
You're still fine.
You're still fine.
Thank
Shauna,
you.
just a second,
Okay.
please. Shauna,
It's
we're
kind
hearing
of,
you
yeah.
over.
Okay. It's a little distracting. For example, in 2016, quota closed with 8 out of 10 for Region 6, but the harvest report says 5 from District 3. Also, studies found simply adjusting the pan tension on modified number 3 Victor soft catches achieved a 94% capture rate for coyotes and 100% exclusion of Swift fox. Why not instead propose these trap modifications? Instead of extending the boundaries so the incidental trap Swift fox can be kept and added to the quota, why not simply any trap fox, Swift fox count in the quota and the excess come off the next year's quota? Better yet, why a trapping season on them anyhow? As it contradicts the goals within the Swift fox conservation strategy, which you were asked to approve in 2018, specifically to increase Swift fox distribution and avoid potential ESA listing. Canada doesn't allow trapping Swift fox. How do the 2 to 3 reported Montana trappers of Swift fox take precedence over the needs and lives of these rare and vulnerable animals? Lastly, the less individuals, the greater the risks to the population. If trappers want to trap them for the notoriety, then how about recruit them for the live trapping, non-lethal studies and translocation? Thank you. I hope you heard me. It was a little distracting with all this like background voices going on. I guess I'll send it to you, my comment here, just in case. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. We did hear you. I had to step away for just a second, but we did hear you and we look forward to your comments and appreciate your presentation. Further public comment?
Thank you.
Further public comment?
I'm seeing no more hands raised.
No more hands raised, Katie?
I don't see any.
Oh,
wait, we do have one. I'm sorry.
okay. Okay, phone number ending in 826. You've been unmuted and allowed into the meeting.
Yes, hello. My name is Michelle Blake. I'm with the Mountain Lion Foundation. Not sure if I'll comment at this moment. I wanted to check with you on the progress of the agenda. I haven't heard a call for comments on the mountain lion quotas.
We had that earlier in the day, and that was a final, and we voted that through. And we did not take any public comment on that item.
I saw that I saw your vote this morning, but as I'm still seeing the mountain lion quotas in the agenda items that are to begin at 10:30 under the wildlife division, I wondered if there was any opportunity to go on record with our comments on the quota, understanding that the commission did already vote to adopt the proposal this morning.
Well, somewhat unorthodox and outside of procedure, given current circumstances. Michelle, if you'd like to just take a couple minutes, we we certainly will hear from you.
Well, I appreciate you indulging me on that. I was surprised to see the vote happen this morning when the agenda item was on the 10:30 block of agenda items. So I just wanted to go on record with our concerns about this plan, understanding that it has been adopted. And before your vote this morning, I did hear your commissioner mention that the majority of the public comments were in opposition to the plan that you've just adopted, but he did mention a lack of a biological basis for this opposition, while he did acknowledge that the Mountain Lion Foundation, of course, did provide an abundance of biological information about not only the ineffectiveness of hunting in general for large carnivores like mountain lions, but the state's overestimation of the lion population and the unsustainability of this plan. Among our primary concerns, FWP is estimating that the mountain lion population in Montana is about 5,330 lions, and use that number to calculate the hunting quotas. But we see this number as scientifically unlikely. If that population estimate were accurate, this would be an acceptable quota of about 12.5% of those lions. But the actual lion population in Montana is likely closer to between 2,112 and 3,258 lions. This is using a sophisticated analysis of the map and known population densities. And so based on that assessment, the proposed quota of 668 lions would account for as much as 31% of the lion population. And that's unsustainable. We also know that hunting is not an effective tool for managing conflicts in general. We've seen that demonstrated in numerous studies throughout Washington and British Columbia. So we believe the proposal as adopted amounts to trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Lions and other native carnivore populations are self-regulating by their territorial nature, and conflicts can be handled by addressing the individual animal involved in the conflict. So I thank you just for allowing us to go on the record and conclude my comments here. Thank you for indulging me.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle.
There.
Thank you, Michelle. I apologize to my fellow commissioners. They know that I don't usually allow comment on a final, but kinder time. Further public comment on the proposal that's in front of the commission right now. I see we have a caller ending with 66. Please go ahead and state your name and provide your comment on the current proposal.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Deborah Chase. I'm the CEO of the Mountain Lion Foundation. Thank you for taking my call and my public comment. I'd like to comment just briefly on the trapping issue that you're discussing right now and support what Stephen Capra was trying to say. And what we're concerned about is that these boundary expansions are, like Stephen said, they're really disrupting public safety, and they encourage bycatching, whether it be beavers or dogs or cats or even children. But our concern is also about bycatching any mountain lion that might come down in the area. So just wanted to make note here that we are against the expansion, and our concern is about public safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment on the current fur bearer proposals?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not seeing any further comments.
Okay. I'll bring it back to the commission for any further comments, questions, or discussion. I see that Chief Kujala has his hand in the air. Go ahead, Quentin.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, and Director Williams, I just hearing some of that comment, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to, I guess what I would say, bring in the other half of of our thoughts that I didn't bring forward in my earlier comments. And that is in our assessment about how to move forward as we approach this commission meeting. and recognizing that there were expectations out there that included, a specific discussion about specific areas here today, and that at least one party took it upon themselves to nominate those sites. I want to make it clear to the commission that we assess that, and if the commission decides to go with the list, if the motion is modified, I want to be very clear, the commission will pick that adoption up and we'll work with that and we'll build on that. As you heard me speak earlier, we think that, an option that continues to explore, some more face-to-face time, for want of a better way to put it, and deliberation across perspectives. If there is tolerance for that process to take place yet and come back to you next year, again, in our assessment, we think that is the better option by an inch or by a mile, better process by an inch or a mile. But that's not to say we will. We are ready. If the commission wants to move something today, we'll work with that as best circumstance allows, and sincerely so, and we'll come to you again in August. I would further say that the first comment about areas versus routes, and I don't think anything in our thoughts, perhaps our vocabulary has suggested otherwise, but I don't think there's anything in our thoughts that at the end of the process, there may in fact be some area descriptions, some descriptions that are more appropriately titled area descriptions rather than route identifications. Point well made. Just wanted to make sure, Mr. Chairman, that certainly that is an option to the commission, and certainly if that's what we hear, we will respond accordingly.
Thank you, Quentin. And so what I hear you saying is, if we've had certain petitions and identification of some trails by a citizens group, that we could adopt some of those now. I've looked at Becky as well, that I think that if we're capturing comment in this next period, that we would be within the parameters of process, maybe to identify some of those trails during this next step without modification of this current motion. But I want some clarification on that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Katie. Sorry, I don't know if there's a slight delay or not, but I do have another hand raised for public comment.
Okay, well, let me get an answer to my question, and I'll address that. If you are interested in commenting, please put your hand up right now with *9, and you'll be called upon in the order that you're in the queue. Ms. Doctor, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, this is Becky Doctor, Chief Legal Counsel for the department. Yes, you are correct that if we do take comment within the comment period, the commission is allowed to act upon that comment at that time. And so that means, I guess, just for legal perspective, that the proposal was broad enough to solicit and elicit comment on that subject, and so it can be acted upon in the final decision.
Thank you.
If that answers your question, Chair Colton.
Yes, I believe it does. Before I take this last bit of comment from the public, is there anything the commission would like to say? Okay, go ahead and Katie, and let the next individual in that would like to comment. Ending in 491, you've been admitted into the meeting.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize, I hit the *9 earlier and for some reason it didn't go through. But Derek Goldman, I'm a volunteer board member of the Montana Backcountry Alliance. We are a statewide group of backcountry skiers, essentially, and we appreciate the commission's willingness to move this forward last October and soliciting areas for potentially needing setbacks or exclusion. We surveyed some of our skiers and other board members in the 3 major backcountry skiing areas of the state, which is the Whitefish community, Missoula, and Bozeman, and found out what are the most popular high-use backcountry skiing areas. And many of our members do like to use these closed roads in wintertime to access the areas and access the backcountry, often with our dogs. And so that's the reason why we submitted this and believe that there are longer setbacks, or in some instances of very high use, complete closures necessary. We thank the commission for looking at this. You know, we do share Commissioner Stuker's disappointment in the delay in the process of this, but you know, we look forward to working with the department, staff, and commission moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Any further public comment?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's it.
Okay. All right. Back to the commission. Comment is closed again. It's open until July 28th, which is a good period of time. Further discussion, comment, or questions from the commission?
Go ahead, Rich.
Mr. Chairman, I was
Yes.
glad to hear legal's response to your question, because, you know, when I looked at the cover sheet, it specifically said we wouldn't deal with that for over a year. So with legal's response to your question, anybody out there that is listening on either sides of the issue, I would encourage you to make public comment during this period so that we can consider the commission and the department at the August meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Mr. Stuker. Any other comment from the commission?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I've had discussions with Mr. Goldman, who was just talking to us, and I know he is very interested in working through much the way that I think Mr. Wakeling talked about, with some dialogues and trialogues and whatever else, some people bringing what they have to offer together and coming up with some really good recommendations as far as where we would make those type of adjustments in the trapping activity.
Further comment from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if I missed it somewhere, but were you saying there was a list of places that people had already submitted that I missed somewhere along the line?
Yeah, it didn't come in our, but the Backcountry Alliance, Mr. Goldman's group had sent a petition and identified some specific trails of high use in that northwestern Montana area. And I think what clearly that has done is prompt some consideration and some thought by members of the commission. Clearly Vice Chairman Stuker has looked at that, and I looked at it as well, but it came in a different format than normal. And so I think, just to reiterate what Rich said, is, we'll be accepting comment. The commission, this particular commission, has been grappling with this definition down to the minutia for quite some time now. And if you'll remember, back in August, we had a split vote on that definition, and some more anxieties that led to us giving the department a charge in October. We have the authority to consider comment regarding setbacks, closures, those sort of things, and the authority to act on that. And recognizing, though, that the nature of this issue, with the opposing views, and very, very stark opposing views, I think is an accurate characterization. We wanted to have this larger process, but there may well be places in particular commission districts that we can look at more closely over this next few months, in prior to August, to see if there's something that should be done.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm finished.
And I apologize for missing that, but if maybe it could be shared with us just so we can see what those areas are, that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Logan, I got mine on Monday, and it's titled FWB Commission External Trapping Setbacks, Montana Backcountry. You may go back and see if your email came in.
I'll look back, but sometimes they get embedded in several emails as commission meetings approach.
Yeah, and it did. I was, yeah, I caught it, but it was in a stack of other, you know, sequential emails from Shauna and others.
Logan, if you just search on Montana Backcountry, it'll pop right up. I just found it myself.
Thank you. I should be better at this technology thing.
Okay, any further discussion or comment before I call for the vote? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for the thoughtful comments. Let's move to the next item. Little Belt Mountains Bighorn Sheep reintroduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Director Williams, Brian Wakeling, Game Bureau Chief for the record. We have a couple of proposed translocations that we want to bring before the commission this morning. The first is the proposal to consider moving some bighorn sheep into the Little Belt Mountains. This is an area where we have tried a relocation prior. There are actually a few sheep that are kind of remaining in the area, but they're not, you know, single digit numbers of animals. They haven't been growing much at all, to the point where we essentially consider this a reintroduction, not an augmentation. We have prepared this proposal, and our intent is to seek the commission's endorsement, that we would then develop an environmental assessment whereby we would take public comment and public scoping on the proposal, and look to try to implement within the next year. Be glad to try to address any question the commission may have on that.
Thank you. I'd like to go ahead and call for I don't have my cover sheet up. I apologize.
I would make a motion if you wish, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Rich.
I move to endorse the department's proposal to conduct an environmental assessment of a bighorn sheep reintroduction to the Little Belt Mountains as presented.
I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Any comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I had extensive conversations with Corey Lechner, the wildlife manager from Region 4, and also Gary Bertolotti, the supervisor there. And I wholeheartedly support this endeavor. You know, there are some concerns, but I think Corey told me last night that the sheep that are there now are probably some that had migrated in from the area we're looking to transplant some others from. And that kind of addresses some of the other issues then of not contaminating what is there, because they're already showing up with the titers that can cause problems.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions, or discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I was just curious if Mr. Wakeling or Mr. Kuzla might be able to tell us, is this funded by the bighorn sheep auction tag dollars, or another way of casting that is, how are those auction dollars spent, and do they help projects like this?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Byarth, Brian, I'll jump in front of you if you're okay with that. The short answer, Commissioner Byarth, is yes. This is precisely the kind of thing that those auction dollars are available for. That is to say, those things that, for want of a better way to put it, kind of above and beyond the normal survey and inventory efforts that we put on the ground from one year to another, and this obviously being a great example of that. And of course, I wanna also add, if I may, when you're talking about auction dollars, in the case of the sheep auction dollars, there's long history of the National Wild Sheep, auctioning that license off. And when you look at the history of the sales there, I mean, there's undoubtedly more than a little bit of capacity there that those dollars at those auction prices represent. So I want to thank that partner. And then of course, also want to make the distinction that a lot of the conversations about sheep in Montana right now include Montana Wild Sheep, the Montana affiliate. So they're there as partners, and Montana's, I would say, unique in the regard that in a lot of our bighorn sheep conversations, there's also the Montana Wool Growers Association. They're working hard with this as well to figure out how to move forward on this. So that's a long-winded answer. Sorry for the liberty taken. In short, yes, auction dollars are coming to bear here to one logistical end or another.
Thank you.
Further comment from the commission? This is an endorsement for an EA to go out, but we will take comments. So if you've been waiting to give comment, please hit *9 and Katie will recognize you and you'll be admitted into the meeting. We have a phone number ending in 432.
Yeah, this is Brian Solon. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you, Brian.
Okay. Name is Brian Solon. Chairman Colton, members of the commission, Director Williams. Brian Solon, S-O-L-A-N. I'm Executive Director, Montana Wild Sheep. Just a little bit of background and history. It's been quite a few years since a new herd transplant was attempted in Montana. The last successful one was that 2007, 2008 timeframe in the Greenhorn Gravelies. I believe last attempt was the Bridgers in 13, or perhaps the Caverns in 14. The bottom line is these are they're tough. The easy ones have been done and completed. So there's a lot of challenges, and moving forward with the sheep plan that attempted to put 5 new herds in 10 years, and the last one has been 13 years ago. So I want to commend Region 4 for really doing a great job in putting this together. Corey Lecker, Jay Colby, in reaching out to the landowners in the area, touching base with the wool growers, understanding the risks, and trying to find a path forward to put some more sheep on the mountain. They've really done a great job with this one. And from our group standpoint, we are committed as far as support, as well as funding. We're available to help with some advanced GPS collaring and to potentially even try to do a region-wide or larger sort of research project that may include this, the Tendoys, Little Belts, Bridgers, and the Greenhorns as well. So well done, and just wanted to extend the support.
Thank you, Mr. Solon, and thank you for your work with the Montana Wild Sheep Foundation and the assistance you always provide. Further public comment? Ending in 933.
Yeah, this is Kurt Alt with Conservation Director for the Wild Sheep Foundation for Montana and International Programs out of Bozeman. I also work directly for the Montana Wild Sheep Foundation as well, and it's hard to follow Brian Solon and all he said. I just want to voice not only Montana's, but also the National Wild Sheep Foundation's overall support for all the reasons and all the aspects that Brian has mentioned. And we really want to commend, National really wants to commend the Montana effort between the Montana Wild Sheep and Montana Wool Growers and coming together to look at these issues, to try to develop an approach that will develop or create some opportunities to do effective separation. As Brian mentioned, those 4 areas we view as a really important place to do this work. I might follow up that you should have received letters from both the Montana Wild Sheep Foundation and the Wild Sheep Foundation regarding this issue, and with broader explanations to come in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Gert. Always good to hear from you. Sorry I missed your phone calls earlier. I hope you're well.
Yeah,
Further
all
public. Good. Further public comment.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that is it.
Okay, back to the commission. Any further discussion or comment?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to flag what the commenters both just said, is that this is a partnership with the Montana sheep growers and the Montana Wild Sheep Foundation and FWP. In my estimation, that's a huge partnership. When we can get domestic sheep growers together with advocates for wild sheep, we can't do much better than that. So I'm really proud of their efforts, and congratulations.
Amen.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to follow up with that. I know Corey told me that they met with the wool growers and some of their officers and whatnot. And in regards to what Pat and Tim both said, if we can have those discussions and moving forward, we're in a lot better place and we'll accomplish a lot more than if we're not bringing those parties to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Stuber. Any further comments? I just would restate all those and again, say thank you and to Region 4 and especially Corey for his efforts on this. It's exciting. I've always wanted to see one through to fruition, and this one seems as close as any that we've had in front of us, and it's the good work of the department and the special thanks to the wool growers and leadership there for cooperation. And so I hope we can move at decent speed on this. Seeing no other comments, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next little belt, Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Director Williams. Mentioned we had a couple of potential translocations we were hoping for to gain your endorsement on. The second one that we're proposing is a pine marten reintroduction. This one would also go into the Little Belt Mountains. This proposal had actually come before the commission in 2014 and received an endorsement at that point. It's been shared with the Forest Service. It's been shared with a lot of different folks, and this is another one of those situations where we actually have an opportunity to work with another group of stakeholders. The proposal would involve using private trappers to actually obtain the source population for these pine martens and allow us to facilitate the actual translocation to start with. Because it's been something that we did share with the commission earlier, we actually have a little bit more of a developed proposal. That proposal has been included in the support material for the commission meeting today. Like I say, we're seeking your endorsement to move forward with the environmental assessment. I would say also that with all of these proposals, once they come to the final standpoint, we're also looking for the authorization of the what would constitute take of the wildlife when we capture it from one location and relocate it to another. And that'll be implicit in the final action if it's approved. But at this point, we're looking for the commission to provide an endorsement. If you have any questions, I'd certainly be willing to try to entertain them. I've also, Bob Inman is also available, far more familiar with a lot of the details, and is also available to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wakeling. I'll call for a motion, please.
Mr. Chairman, I move the commission direct the department to develop an environmental assessment to analyze the restoration of marten to historically occupied habitat in central Montana's Little Belt Mountains.
I'll second that motion.
Motion is second. Questions or comments from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I supported this back in 2014. I still support this endeavor. I did talk with Corey Lechner last night also on this, and I wholeheartedly support it.
Any further comments? Comments from the public. Go ahead and star 9 and you'll be acknowledged on the pine marten.
Mr. Chairman, I'm seeing none.
Okay, back to the commission. Bob, thank you for your work on this. If there's, this is an exciting project, and like Rich, I support it wholeheartedly. Any other questions or comments from the commission? All in favor of the vote signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. 454.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Director Williams. Brian Wakeling, Game Bureau Chief, for the record. There's probably been a little bit of confusion regarding this particular item. We had originally had 3 agreements that we had considered for public comment and informational presentation today. 2 of the agreements are long-standing agreements that we have a substantial amount of data, feedback, a long-running relationship with. We did have a 3rd agreement that had originally been proposed to be included. It was one that was in development fairly recently. Because of the kind of in the little premature to actually get it carried forward. There's some challenges. The landowner has requested that we withdraw that agreement at this point in time. And so the 2 agreements that we have before you deal with the Lee Ranch and also with the Swans Ranch. My understanding is that this is a recent legislative change has delegated the authority to enter into these agreements to the department and the director. And this was something that historically had been held for the commission. The legislative change being what it is, we're certainly complying with legislation, but it doesn't by any means reduce the importance that we feel that the commission has in providing this feedback to the department, the opportunity to engage with the public in this forum. And so despite the fact that it's an informational presentation, we very much are interested in the commission's perspective and certainly to the public's perspective on these agreements as well. And so with that, I'd open it up to any questions and certainly try to address those as needed.
Thank you. Questions, comments, discussion from the commission? We're all familiar with these agreements. The legislative change has kind of puzzled all of us, but it is what took place. I appreciate the department, including the commission. I think whether it's this commission or any futures, that they should be involved in these agreements. And we're the conduit in many places between the landowners and the department. These are designed to create goodwill, provide opportunity for those landowners that allow this public participation. And so I think it's key that the commission always be involved, regardless of who has the ultimate authority. Because the commission could, well, we don't have the authority to maybe undo anything. We can be rather meddlesome if necessary. So I appreciate being involved. I'm going to send it out to see if there's any comment from the public on these 454 proposals. If so, star 9. And again, it's the Swans and Lee, fairly long-standing agreements, certainly with regard to the Swans agreement. And so anybody from the public, I see someone with ending in 933.
Yes, Chairman Colton, fellow commissioners, this is Kurt Alt from Bozeman, this time representing myself as a former department employee that had long involvement with fur bearer issues. And I'm going to comment on the pine marten reintroduction in Region 4. I would really like to first thank the wildlife staff for bringing this proposal forward. The department has done an excellent job with fur bearer issues and pine marten work over the years, including way back when it kicked off the professional career of your deputy director, Mr. Kujala, and recently retired wildlife biologist Craig Fager. I strongly support the restoration effort, including the use of the support of the Southwest Montana Trappers Association to provide live animals for restoration efforts. Making that connection with trappers and restoration efforts is also really important. So well done, strongly support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kurt. Again, do we have any public comment or discussion from the public on the 454 agreements that are proposed? I don't see anybody queuing up. Back to the commission. I don't think we take a vote, but any Vice Chairman Stuker.
Mr. Chairman, I wholeheartedly support this. I also support your comments that the commission needs to be involved, and the PLPW is talking about trying to take something up that would put us back in the mix statutorily. But with the 454s, as I mentioned, they had another one that recently backed out. Region 4, again, I visited with some of the individuals there. And I'm not going to go into their comments or the reasons why the individual backed out, but it does show that we do need additional information put out in regards to the 454, because about a week ago, I had another individual call me and I suggested it to him to look at. It was a landowner who had not drawn during the landowner preference. And I said, this was another avenue. So I think we need to get more information out on these. Hopefully we can get more people, but Region 4 did work hard to get the third one. And I'm sorry it fell through, but I do know the reasons, and I think they're going to be working on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Stuker. Yes, I was also involved in that other agreement and watched the Region 4 people all through, the local area and back into the regional office work really hard. And I was extremely disappointed that didn't work out. But our staff was extremely responsive and engaged right away, and kind of moved that along at a dazzling pace. So please don't get discouraged. We don't know what opportunity exists there anymore, but as Rich says, maybe there's some others out there. So if there's no further comment, I'll just move on to the next agenda item. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, this is Ken McDonald, the Wildlife Division Administrator. I'll be covering the last two items for wildlife today. The first one that we have up is the Mount Jumbo Wildlife Management Area Forest Management Project. With this proposal, we're just seeking your endorsement to, if you give us your endorsement, we would do the MEPA analysis and public review process. What this project is it's a proposal to treat approximately 100 acres on Mount Jumbo Wildlife Management Area using a combination of mechanical and non-mechanical means. The purpose of the project is to thin excessively dense conifer trees with a focus on submerchantable trees less than 30 years old. These trees have resulted in conifer encroachment over the last 30 years that is shading out shrubs and grasses that are used as forage by game animals. It also, this thick understory creates increased fuel hazard and susceptibility to crown fire. So it's a dual purpose for habitat and fire management. The project is being done in coordination with adjoining Lolo National Forest and Mount or Missoula City parklands. So they have similar issues and similar age trees. And so it'll be kind of more of a landscape approach with this one being on the FWP lands. So with your endorsement, we would initiate a MEPA process, an analysis, and a public review process. And if that comes out favorable, we would come back for final approval sometime in the near future. Any questions on that?
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll offer a motion. I want to add a word in there that isn't there right now. It's the Mount Jumbo WMA. Anyway, I propose the Fish and Wildlife Commission endorse the proposed Mount Jumbo WMA forest management project, allowing Fish, Wildlife and Parks to conduct further analysis and associated public review.
I would second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Motion and second. Any comment, questions, or discussion from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I just that area around Mount Jumbo provides a lot of entertainment for a lot of recreational opportunities for the people, and certainly the winter range in there that provided for elk and enhanced by what we're going on here right now be popular with the Missoula people because they sure love seeing those elk out in Mount Jumbo.
Certainly, yes. Thank you for that, Tim. Any further comment from the commission? We are required to take this out for public comment. Is there anybody that wants to comment on the Mount Jumbo project? Star 9 and you'll be admitted.
Mr. Chairman, I'm seeing none.
Seeing no comment from the public, back to the commission. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 And Woods Ranch.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, this is Ken McDonald again. So the final item for wildlife today is the Wood Ranch Wildlife Management Area power line easement, and it's an adjustment to the easement. I think the wording says transfer, but it's really just adjustment of the existing easement. And what this is the Lincoln Electric Cooperative currently holds a right-of-way easement on the Woods Ranch WMA, which is located in Region 1 near Eureka. The right-of-way easement is to maintain approximately 2 miles of above-ground power line on the wildlife management area. Last November, there was a major blowdown event that seriously damaged just under a mile of that power line. You've seen a proposal from us earlier to salvage some of those trees. Those falling over trees damaged that power line. As a result of that, the electric cooperative would like to bury a portion of that power line and has requested that we adjust the easement to allow that. So the adjustment would basically take 0.86 miles of above ground power line, bury those and be replaced by about 0.65 miles of buried power line. Those buried lines would follow existing roads, so it would be within already disturbed area. So if your endorsement today, we would initiate further analysis and a public review process. And if based on this, the decision is to move forward, we'd come back for final approval, potentially in August. So with that, I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move the commission endorse further analysis and public comment of the Lincoln Electric Cooperative Power Line Easement Transfer on the Woods Ranch Wildlife Management Area.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Comments, questions, or discussion from the commission?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I noticed disturbed some land going through there, but I think it would be beneficial with a buried line. We have less chance of fire when a line is knocked down. As we know, some of the big fires in California last year were caused by overhead power lines. So I think this is a very good alternative.
Thank you. I agree. Further comments, questions, discussions from the commission? Any public comment on the proposal at hand in the motion? Star 9 if so.
Mr. Chairman, I'm seeing none.
Thank you, Kate. Okay. Seeing no further comments, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Well, we're right on time here, folks, which I'll give her, it's too bad we weren't together. We could go have a celebratory lunch. Of course, this is the time in the meeting where we take comment on items, again, that were not on the agenda. We won't be taking comment items that we already passed through and that are sent out for discussion, comment. So if you have comments for stuff not on today's agenda, please hit *9 and you'll be acknowledged. We have someone ending in 170.
Hi, it's Casey York again with Trap Free Montana Public Lands. I guess my question is, when will the best interest of the wildlife be paramount in your decision making? All too often, trapping proposals are band-aids or to the benefit for the trapper, not the trapped. When will the other stakeholders, the majority, the non-consumptive users, requests and urgencies be implemented? Will that take money? I'm certain people would be willing to pay to protect wildlife and help conserve them. For 2016, FWP reported receiving comments, 480 comments, and that 54% opposed trapping and favored all proposals to limit trapping. FWP acknowledged for 24-hour trap checks were significant. For 2017, of the 282 comments, only 43 were from trappers. 200 signatures for 24-hour trap checks were submitted. 90% of them were from Montanans, plus a dozen Montana organizations representing thousands of stakeholders. For 2018, the same pattern. 275 comments, only 15 were from trappers. A letter was submitted with 425 signatures, the high majority Montanans, and it was sent in for a 24-hour daily trap check. All of this has been to no avail. In 2018, the TAC was formed to help address the growing concerns from the public regarding trapping. After all the extensive meetings across the state, all the costs, all the comments, what really came of it? The most difficult challenge they had was discussing and uniting on daily trap checks, yet we can't even get it open for public comment. What about a survey? What about a poll? Animals suffering and indiscriminate animals getting seriously injured and killed are the leading objections to trapping. 24-hour or at most daily trap checks would significantly help relieve these valid concerns. Lastly, Montana has reportedly more wildlife than any other state in the contiguous U.S., yet it is said we have less wetlands than any other state. With the vast trapping of beaver, what our topography looks like today has drastically changed from the past. Only 2% of the land out west are wetlands. An estimated 85% of all wildlife are dependent on the wetlands beaver create. Experts say we are in a climate crisis and the throes of a mass extinction, this time caused by us. Meanwhile, Montana deems the most important species in North America for mammals, for birds, for native fish, for water resources, can be trapped for unlimited, unreported recreational purposes 5.5 to 9 months out of the year, with most of our state allowing the greater. How can FWP honestly say trapping is highly regulated and scientifically based? Less than half of the trappers reporting claim destroying almost 20,000 beavers in our state in just 3 recent years. We are in a climate crisis. How is this just? Show us the science. Please make progressive change for wildlife be your legacy while you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Further public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Ending in 042.
Hi, my name is Stephen Van Tassel. I own a company called Wildlife Control Consultant. Wanted to comment a little bit about whether the commission has thought about all of these owners with their dogs and cats roaming around our public lands, and the impact of the hazing and predation these free-range animals are having on our landscape. So one of the things I'm kind of puzzled by is that there's been some concern about trapping setbacks, but there's been no corresponding concern about public, the safety for the wildlife in terms of these free-range dogs or voice command dogs. I'm not talking about hunters here. I'm talking about people who think that when they're out in the woods on public land, they're able to have their dogs roaming free, hazing wildlife, and not to mention all the cats out hazing wildlife. And so I'm a bit wondering where the commission is on that, because some of the criticisms against trappers are designed against the capture of domestic animals, but there's no corresponding concern about the impact that these domestic animals have on wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Further public comment on items not on the agenda? Star 9 if so, and you'll be acknowledged.
Mr. Chairman, it looks like that's it.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you, as always, showing up extremely well prepared and understanding everything that we have to go through. Is there any comments from the commission for the good of the order?
Mr. Chairman, our next meeting, I believe, is August 20th. My August calendar is fairly full, so I hope we can maintain that date. Thank you.
Is that the one we were looking at moving, or did we, because Logan,
I think that interfered with the start of the school year, but
you start school, is it that day or did
that day?
I do have a little flexibility, so if we're going to move it, I would like to see that date brought forward as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I think, so the 20th is when you start, right, Logan, with your teacher? Martha, I think we had some identified dates that would maybe work.
Mr. Chair, I need to double check. I know that for the moment, August 13, we have a management team scheduled, but that's certainly something that we can adapt to accommodate this. I don't at hand have the other dates that were proposed. Perhaps, Shauna, you remember?
I know that you had said that the tri-state is the following week, right, Director?
Correct. Commissioner Brown.
And I'm sorry, Martha, I didn't, my Zoom is delaying, so I only got a part of your question.
Shauna, we were going through potential commission dates for August and remembering that August 20 was a conflict for Commissioner Brower. August 27 is when we have the tri-state meeting scheduled with Idaho and Wyoming. August 13 at the moment is scheduled for a management team meeting. Do you remember what dates, if there were other dates that we threw out there that would work for everyone?
Director, I don't believe that we had visited that yet. I know at the time that the commission approved the calendar at that time, August 20th was okay. So what I can do is I can go through the calendar and see what's available and contact everyone to see what a good date would be, if that's acceptable.
Yeah, let's look at those dates. Let's look at that date of the 13th. I'm in pretty good shape all through there. Also the 18th or 19th. But if at all possible, I'd like to accommodate Logan's schedule, because that's kind of a big deal to be at his new place.
Mr. Chair, commissioners, would it help then if all of you are free on the 13th, then potentially we move our management team meeting from that day?
I think so. If everybody thinks they can make the 13th, maybe we just pin that down. I suspect we'll be meeting in this format.
Mr. Chairman, I can make the 13th, the 18th I cannot.
Okay.
The 17th and 19th are also open, but the 19th is getting close for Logan to get ready too. So 13th worked great for me.
13th is good for me.
I'm good with the 13th.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and create that for now. Let's try to stick to that. And I appreciate the department being flexible with the management meeting. Anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Hey.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
It's safe to end it. Pat, I think I'm on the mic still. Are we good? Okay. All right, everybody, I'm gonna end the meeting, and good to see you all, and take care, and email me if you need anything.